first started out my journey to like learning and, spirituality and so forth, it was 2018. I was so big on content that was about wealth building and wealth creation. Like I just, I think every young person, anybody growing up in America has a dream as a child to obtain that level of wealth, like by any means. And I mean, I say by any means, but it's like, you have a dream, you want to be rich, you want to be famous, or at least have some level of it. But then, you get older. And at this point in time, you start realizing there's a lot of complexities to this journey. And with all of the content that I was indulged in, like at the time, like it was a lot of, it was on this YouTube channel. It was called VYBO. It was like Vibrating Higher. I was really big into like meditation, and, meditation is still a really good spiritual practice. It's still a good practice to kind of like clear your mind. But I just realized that a lot of it was really kind of like tactics. So to assuage and ease and like comfort you in your distress. And, it worked, right? To a certain extent. Like we know spirituality is always going to ground you. But now that I'm older, it's so crazy because, you start thinking about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and you start to realize that for how so many Black people, it's like we very seldom get to that place of where we can really have like a spiritual practice because we're so busy, like kind of at this bottom aspect in like society and trying to relegate our daily lives. And it's so hard to kind of sit and just kind of be in that space of synchronicity and be in that space where you're like, okay, I'm going to be in this flow state. I'm going to manifest. I'm going to do certain things when the basic needs are not getting met. I never realized, well, obviously I think it's just growth. So let me just stop trying to bring the past and the present because to be honest, I think that this is the reality of like growing up. And you start to see things for what it is. And it's like a really, really crazy reality. And so I was just listening to a lot of people talk about poverty. That's kind of been my research here lately. I've been learning so much. And, I'm always down to like come and share and learn. I've always kind of struggled with this, I will say, especially as I'm getting older. I'm realizing a lot of people don't really want to hear it. I had went to the screening for Is That Black Enough For You at my local museum center. And, the writers had came out after the film had aired, and they were answering questions. It was a pretty intimate space, so I was able to ask a question, and I asked one of the writing critics, I was like, hey, how do you feel like the entertainment industry has transitioned? We know that entertainment is one of the leading forces in terms of like Black attention, right? Like we know that the entertainment is a leading force in terms of our influence. And I feel like film can also be something that is very educational. So I was just asking him, I said, hey, how do you feel we've done in terms of educating Black people through the media and through the lens of entertainment, and in this case in film, while maintaining this current agenda of like integration? And to my surprise, I know the question was a little lengthy, but I felt like it really did have a lot of context and a lot of depth. So I was trying to just like, ask that in the best way. But he just was like, it's not even so much a matter of lack of education in terms of like film and entertainment. He says, the better question would be, are enough people paying attention? And I thought that was so big because I turn around, I look in this film, and it's nothing but white people. Like the film is literally, Is That Black Enough For You? And there is nothing but white people in the audience. And I realized something about white people as I'm watching the film. It talks about, the injustice. It talks about the Black exploitation, which is a lot of Black artists and film makers kind of being put in a position to kind of give over the Black community for white entertainment, right? Because Black people didn't have the money to create certain films. Not only did we not have the economic bandwidth, but we were also siloed out of those communities. So a lot of times, we weren't really given the opportunity to come into these communities and share our stories and take control and ownership of the narrative, right? So a lot of times there were some Black artists who would go and they would just pretty much give these stories to Hollywood and to other white producers and writers and creators, and the story would kind of just get lost on us. And it was no longer a matter of education or shining light on a communal issue or communal deficits. It was more so like, this is exploitation. Like, we're being exploited. They pretty much took our story and they took it to these white powerhouses, right? And then now they're pretty much making money off of it, and he pretty much just sold us out. So that's kind of where you get the narrative, like sold out, Black exploitation, et cetera, et cetera. So, but his commentary was so important to me. And I just got to this point in my life too, where I realized that being an adult, being in this space, there's so much to carry. Like, I think about the load that we carry, and I haven't written in a very long time, so please excuse me if my thoughts are a little convoluted. It's been so long since I've actually like written an article. I've been like in such a very interesting place. Honestly, I just think I'm at this point of like survival, and I've been like so weighed down by my studies, by work, by everything. Like, it's just crazy. So, please forgive me if I'm like all over the place in this podcast episode. But I was just thinking about like the importance of like environment. And I just think about how for so many African Americans, man, it's like when you start talking about your history, it's so hard to get people to really listen. And what I realized when I turned around and noticed how there were only white people in the theater, how for a lot of white people, our stories, it's like entertainment, right? It's like, ooh, how can I package this? How can I sell this? How can I kind of take this story for my own personal amusement, And the reason why it's like I really struggle with the collective that we're kind of like this space that we're in, where I just kind of feel like there's this cultural agenda where everyone's like, okay, socially, right, from a societal standpoint, everybody is struggling, everybody is paying things on credit cards and so forth. And I think for me, as much as I hear you guys, I'm so big on keeping a clear focus in regards to African Americans, because African Americans are the only group of people who just don't get the same benefits. Like, I know from my own personal standpoint, African Americans are not typically getting credit card limits with $15,000 if they're even getting approved. We know that a lot of credit unions moved into the hoods, moved into the ghettos, and they're the ones who are capitalizing off of like, our checking accounts and things like that, like savings accounts, but like really checking accounts and payday loans and so forth. Like, we're not getting approved for bank loans, right? So it's like, that's another thing that just kind of like bothers me about that. And then the truth was that every white person had a leg up. I think regardless of how we want to look at it, how we want to feel about the situation, I'm not going to say that it's always a choice, but for the majority of white people, if they have some level of network, they don't have to be poor. They're not relegated to poverty. And I think for a lot of them, it kind of feels good to kind of be in that space. They may be dealing with some psychological things. So like, they may have a mental illness, or they may be, bound by like guilt, or they may be like, there may be other issues. I'm not saying that, that they can't be poor, or that white people aren't poor, or you know what I mean? But I'm just saying, like, watching so many YouTubers really capitalize off of this topic when they're not really subjected to poverty, it kind of bothers me a little bit. And I feel like the message gets lost on us. Now, this isn't to be like, okay, listen, we need to just band together and just like X out anybody else. No, that's not what I'm saying. But what I am saying is that I've seen immigrants come over here, get credit, do what they got to do, and were afforded business loans, businesses, and so forth. When I went to LA, like, there's a whole Spanish community out there. It's not even LA, like Los Angeles is like what? It's like 50% Spanish. Like it's a very rich Hispanic culture, and I'm not saying that they're necessarily thriving. Not everybody is rich, no, but it's very evident to me that they're able to garner some level of bandwidth and find some level of economic support. Black people genuinely get it out the mud. Girl, we get it out the dirt. There is no mud. We ain't got no mud. We ain't got no water on that dirt. Like, it gives straight up dirt, And so for me, it's like I have such a problem with this, and I get so angry because I was talking to a homegirl the other day. She was telling me how she was struggling with imposter syndrome. And I said, every Black person struggles with imposter syndrome. I remember I had like a revelatory moment. This was back when I was like, my conscience was very clear, back before plant-based eating and healthy eating wasn't so freaking expensive. No, but seriously, I was working at a job, and I realized I was capable to do a task. I'm like, man, I can do this. Like, I know I can do this. And I just remember my supervisor at the time telling me like, no, no, for no reason. Right. And in that moment, I realized that for Black people, there's this thing when you're working in these jobs, because that's the thing, right? This is why I say too, we talk about privilege. Like, we have to I just think when it comes to Black issues, social issues, economic issues, political issues, we have to be very, it's a very narrow thing. Like, I really do think it's a very narrow thing. Like, I think as much as we want to be divisive and inclusive, it's just a very narrow, it's a very linear, it's a very narrow thing. Like, it's very narrow. Like, it's not something in which, everybody kind of gets to jump on this bandwagon and everybody gets to kind of have their say about how they've been oppressed, because Black people literally get it the worst in all areas, So, you're in these low level jobs, and of course there's typically 9 times out of 10, okay, I'm gonna be generous, I'm gonna say like 8 or 9 times out of 10, there's a white supervisor, and it's continuous. I remember I was working at a hotel. I mean, just a very ditzy manager, like not able to really do anything. And she was able to be the manager. She was promoted into the position, and it was for no other reason other than the fact that she was white. We were both capable, but it was like I wasn't considered. And so when you talk about imposter syndrome, yeah, that's something that's going to inevitably is going to weigh on you, especially if you're African American, because it's like you are capable and you know what you're capable of, but you always find yourself in this position where someone's like smacking your hand. I always give this analogy too. It's like a baby reaching for the bottle, and the baby knows the baby can drink the bottle, but you keep smacking the baby's hand like, no. And the baby like, what? Like, give me my bottle. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I'm able to feed myself, And so I think when you go through so many of those experiences, especially if you're not able to articulate yourself and really understand what this is, you don't have no, awareness in regards to like race and social constructs and employment hierarchies and how it's always kind of set up for you to be the worker while, there's the overseer. You know what I mean? If you're not really conscious and familiar with that, then you'll start to ingest that, and you won't know why you feel like you have an imposter syndrome. And so it's like you'll find yourself reading all these different books and picking at your mama and I'm not saying that those issues may not be there, but you're gonna find yourself in a space where it's like you're really going to be like, dang, like, what's wrong with me? Like, why am I struggling to believe in myself? Why am I struggling to start this thing? And that brings me to my another point too. One thing I've learned, and I've even spoken to, white business owners, white CPAs and so forth, and they always give this advice that is so prevalent within their community. It's like, well, why can't you just ask your uncle for $5,000? Like, why can't you just ask such and such for $10,000 and just pay it back that way? And it's so crazy to me because it's like, that's the leg up. So I think the thing that kind of bothers me in a sense is like, I feel like I'm noticing even on YouTube in terms of content creators, like this is the big thing. You guys know I'm kind of like coming into the space of content creation now. Y'all know Renaissance Room. We're on the tube. We're on the tube. We don't got the video to match because again, I'm a one-man army, girl. This is a one-woman army, but just so sad. But we're small but mighty. Anyway, you just kind of start to realize how there's always an opportunity like for white people to capitalize. Like I look at some of the newest YouTube channels. I look at some of the content creators who are doing the same thing. Like they have the opportunity and the investment to be able to, for their platforms to grow, or, just algorithmically, you know what I mean? A lot of people are gravitating towards that content. So it's just like, I think we can look at a lot of different factors that play a role. I do think that AI definitely plays a role. There was I can't even think of her name, but it was with NPR Code Switch, is on the podcast. They talked about how artificial intelligence is pretty much racist. And it's not because the robots are racist. It's because the people who program the robots are racist. They did a study where they asked the AI robot to generate an image of a black doctor and a white child. And the robot pretty much just malfunctioned. Like it didn't know what it was talking about. It could not generate that image. And so I think that that's very telling. I even think about this in terms of work and metrics and, audio in terms of like employment, depending on the job that you do. How is that going to play a role in the employment of black people? We know that for black people, we have I'm not going to say black people have a deep voice, but we have a different voice. We're not like, oh, hi, so we talk about like code switching. We talk about like putting on the mask, doing your work, you know what I mean? Type of thing. But generally speaking, white people, black people, we have a little bit of more bass in our voice. I feel like for black men, like you always know when you're talking to a black man, you know what I mean? Like you just hear that versus when you're talking to a white man. And so when you start talking about AI, you start talking about metrics, you start talking about, judging customer service roles in terms of politeness. How does AI play a role in that? And what do we have to look forward to in terms of that? Like, in what ways are we going to be discriminated against essentially by the robots, So there's so much to really take into account. But yeah, man, when I realized like poverty for so many white people, it's not a choice. Like for a lot of them, it's a choice. And I say that because a lot of white people are really focused on generating wealth. I think one thing that kind of bothers me about today and and the defiance of like cultural awareness, right? The negligence in terms of cultural awareness is that white people want to be everything but white, right? There was this kind of brief moment where everybody was talking about genealogy and they were talking about, ancestry.com, which is so wild to me because like I was a freshman. I was gonna say, was I even a freshman? Was I a high school student? I was definitely a freshman. And they were like talking about going on ancestry.com. And granted, I did find my grandfather, which I knew him in my lifetime. He did serve in the war. I know where their home was, their properties and things like that. So it wasn't really that far back. But it's just so crazy to me because I remember when we had to do this project, I'm like, this is so dumb. Like, I didn't feel like it went back further enough to really get me any information. I felt like, obviously, at the time when we were doing Ancestry, this was like 2016. So 2016, 2017, I felt like I'm getting old, man. But I felt like the software was underdeveloped. So I'm not really sure what people are able to find today, but it's like I just didn't really care to get into all of that because I was connected enough to my family and I was aware enough more. So let me just say that, like, always very much aware of my family, always very present of like the people that were around me. Like, I'm looking at hair textures, I'm looking at everything, like, you know what I mean? Like, I'm pretty clear on like where I come from. So I didn't really need a computer to tell me that. So when we did the little project in school, I'm like, this is whack. Like, I was just completely unimpressed. But to just see so many people today like tapping into that and like really buying into, it was crazy to me. I felt like everything that I am in terms of like Indian and African, like all of those things were something in which I just found from my own, like talking to my family, talking to my peers, looking at my grandmother and so forth. Like, and it wasn't really anything that I had to go online and kind of generate because to me, it's just like, how accurate is that? And why are we taking this for face value? So I say that to say there was a boom or a little bit of a surge where white people were kind of going on ancestry.com and they were like, I'm Italian, I'm Black. And we kind of had that little brief moment when everybody was like, okay, hold up, right? You had so many white people coming out, celebrities and so forth, like, oh, I'm 3% African American and I'm 49% Italian. And it was like this whole thing. And this is why I always say like studying culture is so important because we have so many pivotal moments that shift culture, right? Like, for example, I'm not going to get too much into this, but we probably could go into a deep dive like in a little bit, but I kind of want to save this topic for a different like video. Different audio, different podcast, different audio, girl, I don't know. I kind of want to save it for something else. So it's like, I'm not really going to get too much into it, but just looking at Kanye West and how Kanye West has revolutionized the way that we do American fashion, and not even just American fashion, but art and architecture and creativity. So it's just like, when you look at the very pivotal moments that take place in society and how that moment, everything kind of follows after, that's kind of what I'm into. And that's why it's like, this is why I do what I do. I love documentation. Like, that's just my thing, but it's like, that was the moment. Okay. That was the moment. So from that moment, that's when white people kind of started to trickle down into this space of like, oh, I'm not really white. And they kind of started to step away from the grotesque history that is African American studies. Right after that, we had the debut of the 1619 Project, because the Black historians is not going to let y'all forget. And I think one thing that trips me up about like educating in regards to African American history and all things that is American history really is that it's always seen as something that's like detached. Like, put it in a box, it's over there, keep it over there. Don't go into that Pandora's box. It didn't really happen. Yeah, it happened, but it was a long time ago. And it's always like this cherry picking type of thing. Nobody really wants to talk about it. We always gotta sweep it up under the rug. There's no acknowledgement. It's Black History Month. I'm not seeing anybody acknowledge Black History Month. Nobody ever acknowledged Black History Month. But when it's President's Day, the banks are closed. when it's any other day, there's all this acknowledgement, right? Martin Luther King just started getting acknowledgement because y'all didn't pick his history apart. Y'all didn't pick that story apart and took what you wanted. Nobody ever really wants to talk about how he was freaking assassinated, so it's just like, there's always that, right? There's always like the manipulation of culture. There's always the manipulation of like our stories. And so fast forward, and here we are today. And now it's like, oh, let's just all jump on the bandwagon. Let's all just kind of like, we're in this together. Everybody is poor. And it's not true. Like, it's just not true. Like I said, for the majority of white people, I'm going to be honest with you, there really is privilege. There is privilege. You don't have to live in this. This is why you could be working the same job with a person and you busting your chops and you're struggling and you say something like, oh man, that's not on sale. They looking at you like, what do you mean it's not on sale? Don't you have an employee discount? You'd be confused, like, dang, like how can you afford, depending on where you work. I used to work in luxury retail. So, and I'm looking at you like, girl, how can you afford this? You know what I mean? Because there's always that privilege. So that's what we don't understand about white people. And I know that for whatever reason, I don't know why saying white people is such like a bad word. Like, what are we supposed to say? You know what I mean? Like, what is it? I don't know why that comes off as offensive. Like, that's the truth, like, why is that so piercing for you to hear? Like, you're white, So anyway, yeah, I just think that like overall where we are today it's a very interesting place. And so there are a lot of people who have been given grants. There's funding, there's opportunities, and outside of just economic opportunities, there's networking opportunities, right? White people don't have to escape the respectability politic, right? They don't have to escape the professionalism. They don't have to escape, you know what I mean? They don't have to fall into those categories. You don't have to worry about your hair not being done, not being slick enough, your edges not being laid enough, your wig not being on right enough. You don't have to worry about your sneakers not being clean enough because nobody, you know what I mean? So it's just like, there's so many layers to it. That's the thing. And so it's like, I think my problem is because what happens when we try to merge everything together and we do this sense of like integration, we get lost, and it gets lost on Black people every single time. And so what you have is a bunch of Black people who are around here fighting with each other, mad at each other, confused, like, oh, let me move like this, let me move like that, because I got to get to da-da-da-da. You have all these people stepping over each other, going nowhere. You know what I mean? And you know why? Because it's so much deeper than that. And that's the problem. Like, when you don't have the history, when nobody's talking about African American history, when nobody's doing the work and like really paying attention to what is going on and what has been going on for the longest, it gets lost on us. Now, we can look back in the past and we can see where integration has failed us. We can look at it in terms of the school system. We can look at it in terms of like just about any and everything, So it's just like, I'm not sure. I think that I'm not going to say I'm not sure. Evidently, what's really unfortunate is every time you don't know your history, you're going to keep falling for the same stuff. All this is going to do is get lost on us. And where are we going to be? We're going to be the ones who can't afford the low income housing, right? We're going to be the ones who are children out in their street, killing each other. Ain't nobody got no food in the house. Like, we're going to be the ones who are going to be impacted by that because we fall into the poverty line, right? We're the ones who are subjected to poverty. It doesn't mean that you have to stay there. Doesn't mean that you can't get out here and try to make it something of yourself. No. And I think that's the thing too. You talk about maturity, you talk about growing up, you talk about facing reality. You realize that this is your reality and that's your starting line. And that's just the truth. You know what I mean? Like, this isn't a matter of me not speaking life. This isn't a matter of me being negative towards you. This isn't a matter of me telling you can't pursue your dreams. No, I'm just letting you know you're going to be starting from a different starting line. Jamal, you're not going to be starting up there with Tracy. Okay? Derek, you're going to have a different starting line than your boy Cody up there. Okay? It's not the same. And it's like, I feel like that's the problem. That's the message that gets lost on us when we come into this space and it's all about integration. That's the message that gets lost on us when we come into this space and we're integrating the church and we're integrating all these different things. We're not realizing that the black is still struggling, not because of the fault of the black on its own, no, but because of the society, how we're relegated to that. And so instead of us, coming into this space where we're saying, okay, we're going to integrate, we're going to bring our creativity, we're going to bring our gifts, because our culture has so much to offer that we're never really given the credit. We know that we're never getting the credit. We're always in the background. We're always kind of like color over us, step over us, just don't even use it as a reference. It doesn't matter, but it's like, you have to realize that while we're sitting here, helping everybody else, it's like nobody has given us a handout. Nobody has given us a leg up. Nobody has given us an opportunity. So it's like we're in these spaces and we're integrating and we're still having to get it out the dirt and start from ground zero. So it's like every time you kind of start to adopt this type of doctrine, you need to educate yourself and look at your brothers and sisters and understand that being poor is not a moral failing. Being poor and being impoverished is systemic. This is not a matter of like, oh, he didn't go to school, because we can talk about school. I mean, you get out of school, it's a whole lot of brothers, lawyers out here who can't find jobs. So what are you talking about? You know what I mean? It's so much more than that. So it's just like, don't be confused. That's the only thing I'm trying to say. Like, just don't get it twisted. Like, keep your head on the swivel, shoot, but never dribble. No, I'm kidding. No, but seriously, that's, we're not going to quote Drake here, but I'm being serious, so it's just like, we just find ourselves in a space where, our communities are in uproar, right? We're coming into this space, we're integrating relationally, we're doing all these different things, but our communities are still suffering, and this isn't like on some, let's march stuff, but this is just on some, let's just, you got to pay attention here to what's going on. You have a lot of people who are jumping on this bandwagon of like POC and brown people and all. Indians can come over here and they paid. Indians is out here owning oil companies. You never seen a black man. You ain't seen no black man in this amount of time own no oil company. So you have to understand that like everybody's got a hand up. And I think one thing I always want to make clear too about other minorities. And one thing about me, I'm always willing to step back. I'm always willing to realize I don't know everything. I don't have any friends of other minorities. So I'm never going to be like, oh, their stories don't matter. That's not at all what I'm saying. And I think quite frankly, I think it's very unfortunate that for the black person, we always got to sidestep what I'm saying to my people and to black people and to the black community. And on behalf of being a black woman, to address everybody else, to make sure everybody else is good. And I think that just really says a lot about our leadership, and how we're really standing on something, but it's like we're made to feel 2 feet tall, and that will never sit right with me. But it's like every other minority wants to come to America. That's the thing too. So it's like you can't put us all in this group like, oh, we're all minorities or oh, we're all POC. That's not true. You know what I mean? We were taken from our land. You know what I mean? We're supposed to be in Africa. It'd be different if we was all in Africa and we like, okay, we coming to the States. You know what I mean? That's not what it is. People come here for better opportunity and they get that opportunity. We still at the bottom struggling, trying to get an opportunity. You see what I'm saying? So it's like, it's completely different. It's not the same. And I think these are conversations that's really hard to have. One, because I think we're so dispersed in our thoughts and our thinking. I think two, we're so dispersed because it's like, we don't have the education. I always tell you guys, like, I'm never faulting any black person for not reading. I'm never faulting any black person for not knowing certain things, because the truth is just that, when you're starting from ground zero, nobody ever told you. Like, whoever told you that you supposed to know these things? You know what I mean? Whoever told you? You never even knew. Like, you think about how much there is to learn. The things that we should have been learning in the 80s, and that's stuff that we should have been learned in school. Now here we are, grown adults, you got kids, you got work, you got school, whatever the case may be. And now you got to put all this study on your back, on top of the real world, on top of like taking care of yourself, on top of your job. Like, that's crazy to me. So it's like, again, starting at tell you about that starting line. We're starting very, very much behind. And I think for me, I don't make content to educate white people. That's not why I make content. I personally think that that's just a waste of time. Like, that's just not what I'm about. That's all about you and your content, and that's the space for you. But me personally, I educate mine. I don't make content to educate, everybody else on that other starting line. Okay. No, but seriously, I don't. And so where we are right now is heartbreaking. Outside of poverty, you start thinking about poverty and you start looking at how not having those basic needs met start to contribute to other mental health illnesses and other mental health, other factors in regards to mental health, and that's what's really alarming. We're at this place now where it's like it's so expensive to live, you know what I mean, that people are literally not getting their basic needs met. Like, we're so beyond just, save a couple of dollars here and there. And let me actually touch on that, because I talked about how, poverty is a choice for white people. So because white people come from from generations of building wealth, because they are a culture of generational wealth, right? You have to understand, in order to acquire generational wealth, what you're really saying is, I'm willing to live a impoverished life, and save every cent and put that into investments and put that into real estate. And I'm not going to spend a dime of this money. That's what you're saying. And I think that's also another thing too. You talk about generational wealth, because people are always like generational wealth. And I think we start from the end goal, right? It's like people say generational wealth. Let's say we have a line. Okay. At the start of the line, it's poverty, because like I said, like, let me not say in poverty. Let's just say a willingness to sacrifice. Okay. And then the end goal is the real estate and the businesses and all these different things, multi-corporations, whatever you want to call it. Okay. So because we're already starting way behind that, right? Like, the start goal, the sacrifice, you already don't have anything to fall back on, right? You don't have property. You're not going to be living rent free in somebody's house that they left you. That's not going to happen. Like, you're going to have to work. You're going to have to get out of the mud. So you're already, again, you're not on that starting line. Okay. So you're already starting from like ground zero. And let's just say, your business does well, you make 300K, but the years go on and it's a new entertainer and people get distracted. So you're no longer the hot thing. Now you're kind of put in this position to say, okay, am I going to exploit myself and possibly, potentially my community to continue to make this $300,000 that I've been making consistently to get to this end goal where I can build a business? Because, I'm a first timer, I was living life, I was living lavish, I was buying cars, I was buying what am I willing to do to have this money be consistent? Because we know that with entrepreneurship, unfortunately, it's just not consistent. So when you start talking about compounding, you're talking about compound, right? You're talking about like, I got 300K consistently each year. Like when you start talking about like money and compound, depending on the work that you do, a lot of times for African Americans, we do typically lean towards entertainment and creativity versus like, maybe like a tech corporation. Not saying it's not possible because we've seen that happen. And there are a lot of people who are in tech who are doing great things, building apps. We know Blavity is another great tech company that, startup. So it's not impossible, but it's just like, so you start looking at those sacrifices and you have to ask yourself, am I willing to live on pretty much nothing my entire life? Am I willing to sacrifice and live on absolutely nothing my entire life so that I can at least give this next thing to this next generation? And I think that that's a better question in terms of like generational wealth. I feel like that word has been used so loosely and it's been thrown around so loosely. And I think that it gets people excited to get on the go, to start and to like make a bunch of money. But it's like, it's so much more than that. And, so I say that, white people being impoverished intentionally because that's how you build generational wealth. You don't spend anything. You barely go on vacations. You don't, for some people that might be a very miserable life, but that's how the game goes. And that's so that the next generation can live a little bit better than you. And so when you're already at the starting line where you're already not really making a lot of money, you have another tally on another load to carry, which is respectability politics. You can't be walking around not getting no haircut as a black man or a black woman. Like you can't walk around with your hair not being done. You can't look polished. You can't not look, you know what I mean? And I'm not saying you got to go and buy Mason Margiela, but realistically, you're not going to be able to live like I don't know if you're going to really be able to live on such humble means. We know that a lot of times when we're kind of in that space, because of our prioritization or our over prioritization of materialism, you're going to be exiled from your community. So let's say you decide to live this life. Nobody around you at 26, 25, 23, 30 even understands what we're talking about in terms of living a very like minimalistic life where it's like, I'm cutting my own hair. Like, those are little things, but like, let's just like really get into like, I'm not, I got one pair of jeans for a year and I'm being serious. Like I'm willing to thrift everything. Like I do kind of feel like we are in that space. I'm not going to say it's impossible, but I'm talking about like, look at the reality. It's one thing when you are choosing to go thrifting and you're choosing to cut your own hair, but it's one thing when you're like, I can't afford to go get my hair done, or I can't, you know what I mean? Because of this long-term goal. So it's like, when you start looking like, what does a life like that look like? I've just not seen that for a lot of my black brothers and sisters. I've just not seen that. And like I said, because of the respectability politics in terms of how we have to look and how our presentation has to be and how we have to be on, you know what I mean? If we want to maybe attract a different type of partner of a different, socioeconomic or even just, educational class, you're going to have to look put together. So, it's like there are a lot, again, another tally, right? There are a lot of things that are going to kind of like hinder you in your walk to building generational wealth. So it's like, are you willing to pretty much live a life of solitude and leave nothing? You know what I mean? And even still, it's like you start talking about a will and things like that. And for so many of us, unfortunately, when we pass along, it's like, whether or not we had the education or, I don't know. I just think that there's so much there. And I just think that too often we get so riled up about entrepreneurship and that's the end goal. And we don't think about the sacrifice. And I just think that there's so much education missing in the middle. And that's literally my whole purpose. And so I say that to say, we have these aspirations in that of like our white counterparts, and we don't have the realization and the education that makes it very painstakingly evident and very much clear that you don't have the same starting line. And it's not impossible. It's just that you don't have the same starting line. So I was talking to someone, I'm going to end with this. I was talking to someone and I'm like, man, it does kind of seem like, because I mentioned the film that I went to, right? I was like, it does kind of seem like we're at this place where we're not paying attention. I have a couple peers around me, and I've like tried to talk to them about African American history, and I've been on this for a while now because the work is endless. There's a lot to learn. And, they definitely was looking at me like side eye. Nobody's really trying to hear that. You know what I mean? It's like, and I do think in part because I think Black people are survivalists. I think because we have to go on and get throughout the day, because we are in integrated spaces. The world has changed. It's what it is. It's not to say that, it's a bad thing or it's a good thing. That's not really how I'm categorizing that. And that wasn't like that type of dichotomous thinking was not the reason why I referenced that. So it's just like when you start considering where we are and just how much it takes, as a Black person to kind of just get throughout the day, depending on where you are on the economic or within the economic class system, it's like, it's hard. And if you got other responsibilities, it's like, you're not trying to hear that. You don't have the time to even really sit and process it because you have so many other things to worry about. And I think that this is probably one of the most heartbreaking things about, pretty much being at that bottom line. I think this is one of the heartbreaking things about being relegated to laborious tasks and, being subjected to a continuous labor in a country in a land of quote unquote opportunity. You're always relegated to laborious roles. And it's unfortunate. I think when you're at that role, it's really hard to kind of get out of it when you're kind of placed into a space of like, I'm just a worker. I'm going to work this job. Like, this is what it is, whether the job is tedious or whether it's like very laborious, on your body or whatever. Yeah, I feel like that's a very hard thing to kind of like get yourself out of and like come out of a different space, because I just think that, once you start acquiring responsibilities when you're in that space, whether it's bills, whether it's children, it's hard, to get out of that. And so I just think that you wonder why things are the way they are. You have to take another look. And I think before you kind of jump on the bandwagon about anything, you should really consider where you are in terms of that starting line. And again, it's not to discourage anybody. Like, I feel like I'm someone who's very hardworking. I'm persistent, and I think for every Black person, we're just persistent. But I do think sometimes these conversations can kind of have a little bit of a low mood effect, and I do think that it could kind of make you feel like, dang, why even try? And I think that that's kind of just like the introduction to African American studies, like when you start learning about how things are and you start educating yourself about the ways in which things are, emotions arise. Emotions arise for white people as well when you start learning about what has been done and the positions and the opportunities and all the things considered, right? It's no wonder that every Republican, every conservative, and every white content creator has 1 million YouTube subscribers, within a short span of time, like, it's just like, it's different, it's very different. And so I think because we do have this idea of like being self-made, I think because we do have this attitude of like, to each his own, there's risk in terms of like working with one another, I do think that we struggle, and so we start talking about relational dynamics. I think that in terms of really like getting ahead, I mean, we really would have no choice but to kind of band together and like try to work together. Like, I think that is literally our best bet. And, that's obviously something that we struggle with as well. So I don't know. I think that overall, yeah, this is something to consider. I think I'm all out of thoughts. So I think I'm going to end the podcast here. But I think in order to even get to a spiritual practice or to get to a place where you can even just shortcut, skip the line, and maybe even possibly manifest something, I think you have to start with that very basic foundational level. And I think right now in today's society, because we're just so accustomed to seeing very glamorous images ugly things, right? Really, really ugly things such as like poverty and, things like that. I think that that's just too much for the modern human. Oh, let me just say this. That's too much for the adjusted human eye to bear witness, right? Like, I just think that when you are so used and accustomed, especially at this point, to Black luxury and, images of like this and images like that, and you're looking at, other people who are in different economic positions, or they may live in a different state, right? They're not really impoverished. I realize that like my state, our median income is like $57,000. You know what I mean? So that, that means that like most people make like 57 grand. Like, you know what I mean? The most you're probably going to make here is 60 grand. Like, isn't that crazy? And so you start thinking about like poverty in terms of state and what's available and what's possible. But then you also start looking at trade-offs, right? Like, okay, if I was to move to a bigger city, I'm making 102 grand or 102 grand or whatever. What are my trade-offs, But then what are the things that I'm bringing in, right? Like, I'm talking about California, like the health and nutrition in California is amazing. You know what I mean? Like, it's no wonder people have like sun-kissed skin there. I mean, the air quality is better, the food quality is better, there's better water. Like, it's incredible. You start looking at down south. I talk about this a lot, being around other peers who have a similar interest in terms of intellectualism, who have a similar interest in cultural awareness in regards to African American studies, where it's not a taboo type of conversation. Whereas where I live, it is a bit taboo, and there's not really a lot of support and backing. There's not really a lot of education just outside of African American studies. I think like median is like maybe 2-year degree, maybe like an associate's, maybe like, it's like you start looking at your state and the demographics and the factors that play a role in your economic and your educational levels. And it all starts to make sense, so it's like, it's never really to fault yourself solely. But I do think that as African Americans, we just kind of have a tendency to always take the brunt of everything. And I think it's important to kind of shine a light on a lot of the factors that are at play, and also just kind of like garner a sense of awareness for where you are. And so there's that. That's the end of today's episode. I'm not saying that we should blame other people. It's not what I'm saying. I don't really think this is a blame thing. I think this is more so like an awareness thing, and I think that this is more so a video, I keep saying video. I feel like video is coming soon, but it's just more so like a podcast to kind of like shine light on the way things are. And this is more so like not going to be for everybody. I would definitely say for those beginners out there who may live in a similar state, or you may be up north, which I've been talking about a lot lately, like, Black people being up north, then that can really help you, like, that can really help, massage some things and clarify some things for you. So yeah, I just think that like, you just shouldn't get it twisted. I think that it's easy to conceal your privilege, where you're like, okay, you know what? I am not privileged, because I just think that in this case, we're all so desperate for community that we're willing to conceal the privilege, right? We're willing to be like, oh no, I'm not privileged. You know what I mean? Because it's like, it's easier to conceal that and have a form of community versus to be like, yeah, I did get that money to start that business, or I do have this, and you know what I mean? And I do have these opportunities, and I was, favored in this certain position because I know a guy, and you know what I mean? It's easier to kind of like navigate, like get out of that and be like, you know what? Yes, I want friends. I just kind of want to breathe, because I don't want the feelings that arise from education.